Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, "Won't get me a much-needed PC upgrade to properly do my job? Okay, I'll make you watch me work. I run the parts room at an independently owned auto body and collision repair shop. We'll call the owners Mr. and Mrs. Bossman. We do mostly insurance repairs and always have between 20 and 50 vehicles on property in various states of repair, depending on how busy we are. Once the estimate for a specific vehicle is approved, my job is primarily to order all the parts for the repair, track and receive and organize all the parts for all ongoing repairs as they arrive, input the invoicing and process any returns for wrong, damaged, unnecessary parts and such. Plus IT work, because apparently I'm the only person there who knows you can just Google a problem and somebody has usually already posted the answer on a message board from 6 years ago. I complain a lot, but in actuality I very much like my job and I've become exceedingly good at it over the years. My co-workers are generally pretty great, there's almost no office drama, I don't usually deal with the general public and the owners are mostly solid bosses, a husband and wife team. Mr. Bossman runs the day-to-day shop and he is there on site pretty much every day, while Mrs. Bossman comes in periodically to do the books, which she watches like a hawk. Mr. Bossman is a decent guy so far as bosses go, but Mrs. Bossman is great. She's just one of those high-personality types who's all peaches and sunshine and rainbows 90% of the time, right up until the moment something doesn't go entirely her way. At which point she drops the smile and becomes the stubbornest immovable object you've ever butted heads against. May God help you if you actually anger her. She's not a Karen in the slightest, she's just an elemental force of nature and you can bend like the reed or break like the twig. So I deal with Mr. Bossman on a daily basis and only deal with Mrs. Bossman a few times a week when she needs something for accounting. My default work ethic used to be set to sack of potatoes, but that doesn't fly with the Bossmans and especially not Mrs. Bossman. I have learned the hard way to be very, very proactive in my duties, which is directly why I'm now a great parts guy. Didn't take long to find out that it's just far easier and safer to be able to redirect the coming storm with knowledge and paper trails than it is to face the fury head-on with laziness and ignorance. She always says the 3 most important rules to follow in this industry are 1. Cover your butt, 2. Cover your butt, and 3. Cover your butt, to which I'd add a 4th rule, always send an email beginning with "per our phone call, I'd just like to remind you." Always have an email, saved my butt so many times, becomes relevant later, and she freaking loves me because I have become exceedingly excellent at making her job easier through diligent bookkeeping. As you also might imagine, doing all this ordering and invoicing and emailing and such demands heavy use of a computer, and for years I had to make do with one that was never built nor intended for the task. It wasn't even very old, just an underpowered tablet-style budget computer originally only meant for the shop foreman to occasionally check estimates. At any given time I had to run our estimating software plus 2 to 4 price matching programs and their accompanying background scanning programs, plus multiple Chrome windows for email and parts vendors and parts finder websites. Plus image software to view repair photos or edit diagrams to email back and forth. The budget computer had 2 gigs of RAM and a dual-core 1.3 GHz processor. It could barely handle running Notepad if you had the main estimating software running, and it made my job painfully slow, even at the best of times. For 4 years I'd mention it to Mrs. Bossman and it was always, "Oh right, I keep meaning to look into that," and then nothing, but that was better than bringing it up with Mr. Bossman. Mr. Bossman was a former repair technician before they opened their own shop together. So anything on the office end is already good enough until it breaks and not worth wasting more money on in his eyes. All the upgrades should be on the production side of the shop since that's what he knows well. She's much more practical about office upgrades, thankfully. Anytime I'd mention how slow my computer was and how much it was slowing down my work, he'd just laugh it off and say, "It does the job, don't it?" and walk away far too pleased with himself. Mrs. Bossman had been going back and forth with a specific vendor that was arguing against some outstanding credits and unpaid invoices that didn't match our numbers, which means they don't match my numbers, so she came into my office to ask me to look into them as normal. But today is not normal, it's especially busy and I'm already a day behind where I should be. Cue malicious compliance. This time I decided that unlike normal, my workload was light enough, that I totally had the time right then and there and could look them up for her right on the spot instead of bringing here the files later that day. This seemed urgent after all. So I began searching our database for the problem invoices, and very deliberately and thoroughly went through every program I possibly could, opening every estimate and reconciliation and digital footprint to pull up any scrap of even slightly relevant information for her, so that she had all the relevant info to argue with the vendor. Each new screen freezing and pausing and loading anew, each new refresh taking more of those long-form time-dilated seconds to complete. Those seconds that drag on and on and on like waiting for a traffic light to turn. I was just being properly diligent, you must understand. Oh, here it is, I'd say in my most matter-of-fact, perfectly normal everything is fine and standard and typical voice. Yeah, that part was returned back on. Oh, let me pull up the credit memo. Oh, you know, actually that just shows when I generated the return but not when the vendor actually took it back, actually. I remember this one now. The driver didn't leave a return confirmation slip, so I think I sent the vendor a reminder email about that. Let me pull that up. Ah yes, I told them about the issue 2 months ago, and oh, this is a follow-up email that was part of another chain. Let me forward you both of those, and actually I think I can still pull up the estimate here since it has the full reconciliation. Uh-oh, I hope it didn't freeze completely, just wait a sec and it usually catches back up. She kept her smile up, but I could tell it had shifted and she was getting annoyed. Does it always take you this long to look up the invoices? I could tell she was getting really impatient, but she couldn't say anything about it since I was doing exactly what she'd just asked of me, and she does normally love that I'm this thorough, so long as she's not waiting in real time. Huh? Oh yeah, this is normally like this, I said casually. It's kinda frustrating sometimes, but Mr. Bossman doesn't want to buy another computer since this one does technically do everything I need it to do. Asterisk asterisk, perfectly innocent moon eyes asterisk asterisk, it doesn't slow me down too much. Not usually, asterisk asterisk, blink, blink, puppy dog face asterisk asterisk. I continued doing this for all 5 or so problem invoices, and honestly, it was a 100% typical thing to look up and really only took maybe 15 minutes total in the end. The only difference was making a big show of it while intentionally making it look like I wasn't making a show of it, but that was enough. Well, I really think we need to look into getting you a new computer. This can't be good for production turnarounds if it's always being this slow. Huge success. Storm of fury successfully redirected from self to vendor, armed with time-stamped acknowledgements for every rogue charge, and finally knowing the crap I have to sit through each and every time I double-click. With all the invoices and credits properly tracked on our end, vendors' accounting had to admit the fetch-up had been on their end and we had been billed in error. I'm not always right, but even when I'm wrong, I can usually pull up a time-dated email to make it look like I wasn't wrong. Bend a little, and the hurricane may just pass you by for a less prepared target. She waited a few weeks to find a good deal, but sure enough I had a new computer shortly thereafter that is much more capable of running everything I need to run without derping out on me, and it's been an absolute champion. Decided to write this because it's been almost exactly 2 years working on the new machine that's still going strong, and just today I got an unrequested raise for good performance, so I'm feeling overly pleased with myself. The next one is titled, Office Thermostat Must Be Left at 16°C? My boss was brought up in a household where the solution to being cold was putting another jumper on, to the extent the inside of the windows used to freeze. Lord knows how many times I have heard that story. Unfortunately, instead of reveling in the marvel that is central heating, my boss feels it necessary to impose the same draconian rules straight from the 18th century on all of us in the office. In a word, it gets damn cold at work. For context, I work in a converted barn which is both poorly insulated and has a tall vaulted roof. This means any heat dissipates upwards and the building generally needs a lot of heat to stay comfortable. It is not uncommon to be sat indoors wearing my small down jacket and thermal base layers to keep warm. If I was working outside I could accept this, but in an office environment it's unnecessary. To make matters worse, I suffer from Raynaud's, which has been getting worse for the last few years. My condition makes it really rather miserable to sit at work for 8 hours with numb fingers and toes, all because of the lack of proper heating in the middle of winter. I am a long-standing employee, but in all my time working for my company there has always been another colleague with a far more vocal opinion on how warm the office should be. For the last few years, for instance, a colleague of mine would make a big parade about cranking the heating up to 24°C multiple times a day. This resulted in a daily tit-for-tat between my colleague and boss. Typically my boss would see the thermostat, exclaim it's too hot and switch the boiler off at the mains. No heat. I tried in vain to convince my colleague to leave the heating at a reasonable level, say 19 to 20 C, as I was certain my boss was unable to actually tell the heating was set higher than his preferred 15 C unless he could visually see the stat set higher. I was ignored, the tit-for-tat continued, and so did the cold. Roll forward a few years, I am now the only person left in the office other than my boss, his son and an administrator who works part-time. The temperature has started to drop and the cold has been drawing in. The heating was switched on Monday this week and like clockwork set bang on 15 C. I decided enough was enough and sat down with my boss to discuss the heating. I explained how cold temperatures affects my Raynaud's and asked if he would be willing to increase the thermostat. Surprisingly my boss was pretty compassionate and promised to increase the heating starting the very next day. True to his word my boss did increase the thermostat by 1 ducking degree. Apparently 16 C was his limit. To say I was livid was an understatement. But more disheartening was looking towards another winter shivering at my keyboard. I couldn't stand the thought, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. 2 really important bits of information popped into my head that morning that formed the perfect plot in an instant. 1. The thermostat was old school, analog not digital. 2. My boss and his son were out at a meeting for the whole afternoon and the admin wasn't due in at all. Roll on lunchtime, I took it upon myself to research the model of thermostat. I found an archived manual online, page 3 calibration. I couldn't believe how simple it was to adjust the unit. There was 1 screw to remove the outer casing which exposed the dial. The dial then simply lifts off the spindle and is rotated and reinserted onto the spindle to calibrate the unit. Armed with my Swiss Army knife, once I was alone in the office I got to work. Disassembling the unit I rotated the spindle clockwise by 4 degrees, so now when set at 16 C the thermostat would actually measure 20 C. I replaced the casing and using a relative humidity meter we use for work I tested the switching point of the stat. The office measured at 16.2 C and the stat clicked on around 12 C. Hearing the boiler fire in the kitchen gave me the biggest grin I have had in ages. That was on Tuesday, the remainder of the week has been glorious. For the first time in 8 years the office is actually at a constant, comfortable temperature. I had been waiting to post this in line with the rules as no fallout had occurred. However this afternoon my boss asked if I was warm enough, again unusually compassionate. While I felt kinda bad to go behind his back it does give me scope to increase the heating even more when it starts getting really cold in the next few months. I was also pretty ecstatic as it proved the hunch I have had for years, my boss has no idea if the heating is set warmer, other than the number shown on the stat. So an all-out win for my bit of malicious compliance. The next one is titled, Opened my new business and my first big client tried to rip me off. So, I opened a lighting business, import-export. My brother was getting married and he found a new hall that was in construction and it would be done in a few months, so he decided to sign a contract with the owner to rent it for his wedding, catering included. So I spoke with the owner of the building to see if I can sell him all the lighting equipment that he needed and he accepted my offer. Yay, my first big client with an order worth over $10,000. So I ordered everything and created a special system that would work with his needs. He paid 30% and after delivery he would pay the rest of it. The day came and all the items arrived. I delivered them into his office and noticed he had a lock, yet the door was missing a huge window, like 40% of the door, and had the invoice with me. But he couldn't pay that day. I thought it was no biggie since he is a busy man. I tried the next day, and the next, but he was always busy. So the last time I tried, I was already parked in front of his office and again he couldn't pay. So I went up to his office and took all the lighting equipment that was not installed yet. Through that window that was missing. Then I called him and told him to pay up if he wants them back. He was upset, threatened to come to my house and beat me up, threatened to go to the police for trespassing. I was a tiny but scared but also furious that he shafted me for $10,000, which by the way was my brother's wedding money. After a while I never heard anything from him. My brother cancelled his wedding at that hall obviously, to which the guy that shafted me had the nerve to act surprised that he cancelled. Anyway, without the lighting equipment that I had taken back, he did not have any lights and couldn't hold weddings for a while. After 1 year of trying to turn on his lights and not being able to because I designed the system, he called because he would like to pay. So I asked him to pay the full amount plus $2,400 in damaged equipment and he agreed. So he paid in full and his lights would still not turn on because his electrician fried most of the controllers, so he kept calling daily and I kept hanging up because guess what? My warranty was only for 12 months, and he passed that by 1 month, so not my problem anymore. The next one is titled, You Know What They Say About Glass Houses. This story begins a while back. I was married and in an open, poly relationship. It was fantastic. I never hid the nature of my relationship from family or friends. Most didn't really care, or would just say, not my cup of tea. But whatever. I was happy. My wife was happy. Other people we had relations with were happy. Life was good. Well, my neighbors were an exception. These uppity people looked down their noses at everyone. And not only did they openly and loudly disagree with our lifestyle, but they took it upon themselves to make snide comments and backhanded remarks whenever in earshot, including within listening distance of my other partners when they had the chance to. For the most part, everyone ignored them. But it was still a dick move. My partners intensely disliked them. They badmouthed me throughout the neighborhood. To up the ante, these two were new parents and started hassling my wife when she was going to have children. Neighbor lady in particular enjoyed badgering my wife about having kids. Now my wife and I agreed when we got married that we wanted to remain child-free, but oh no, the neighbor wouldn't let up and kept sticking her nose into our relationship at every turn, either about how there was no way my wife could be happy in this kind of relationship, or about not being fulfilled if she wasn't having children. As time went on, my wife ended up changing her mind on having kids, go figure. She started spending all kinds of time at the neighbor's house with their baby and would come home demanding babies from me, yes, demanding. I did not change my mind. I was not, nor have I ever been interested in being a parent. She knew this when she married me. This disagreement eventually led to my divorce. As my life was dissolving before my eyes and soon-to-be ex was moving out, neighbor couple was more than happy to help her pack her U-Haul for departure. They even gave her extra stuff from their own basement to help her on her way, talking crap about me the whole time. If he loved you he would have given you a baby, they told her, a line they repeatedly fed to her and that she had screamed at me in fights over the topic, ****** years go by. I am polite to neighbors but don't go out of my way. Because duck them. And I'm an introvert anyway, so no big deal. Well, I end up catching up with an old friend of mine, who starts telling me about her experience with my neighbors. It seems they wanted to have a swinging relationship with her and her boyfriend. My friend, who was a swinger, shut them down. Told them in person she was not interested, and to leave her and her boyfriend alone. Neighbor couple did not listen, and continued to pursue. Neighbor lady in particular was sending multiple text messages and meeting my friend's boyfriend at lunch. Over time, this led to trust issues and the eventual demise of my friend's relationship. These two buttholes just keep sticking their noses where they aren't wanted, and keep interfering with other people's relationships. Now, part of what comes from this conversation is that the neighbors have a profile on a swingers website. You have got to be kidding me. After all their snide comments and judgments on my relationship, the two of them are swinging. Friend tells me where their profile is, and sure enough, these two morons aren't even smart enough to mask what town they live in, and their profile name is their real names. So, I sign up, screen grab their little profile, including the screen name and some racy pictures and some juicy stories shared by some other couples they've met with. They have 5-star ratings, she's apparently very bi, and he loves licking the kitty. I happen to casually share my discovery with one of my other neighbors, and before you know it the whole neighborhood is abuzz. They're suddenly having a hard time finding sitters for their kids because the teenage girls in the neighborhood aren't allowed to babysit for them anymore. Their house goes up on the market. That could be the end of the story. But I'm not satisfied that this is enough. They've helped drive a wedge into the most important relationship of my life and destroy my marriage, did the same to a friend's relationship, and who knows how many others. They're getting away too easy. So somehow said screen grab gets printed and makes its way to neighbor lady's workplace where it can make the rounds there. As far as I know, she hasn't quit yet. Probably can't afford to after buying that huge $350,000 house in the upscale development across town, where they've also gotten copies of their swinger stats passed around and stapled to phone poles. No idea how that happened though. So, that is the story of how I taught my brother and sister-in-law that people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. The last one is titled, "Ram my scooter on an empty road, hope you like tailgating my butt for eternity." So this just happened. I was riding my scooter at slow cruising speed down the main street of nearby colony, one of the biggest residential colony in Asia, with an empty road in front of me as it's pretty late in the evening. It's a narrow road with a divider in middle with room for only bus-sized vehicle to pass at a time on one side. So the smaller vehicles like my scooter are forced to stock to left side of road. Now, this white hatchback appears from nowhere and starts honking at me for no goddamn reason at all. Clearly he had room to pass through. But the idiot of a fatherless driver decides to ram me as I was preparing to give him more room to pass through. It was a minute nudge on my plastic bumper, but I felt it. I was furious as I saw cigarette-smoking middle-aged pedo look having blob sitting in the driver's seat signaling me to move out of the way through my rear view. I was about to stop my scooter and confront him. Then I remembered my mum's words to never talk to a greasy old stranger on a dark isolated part of town, and also that revenge is dish best serve hot. So, I decided what a sane person would do in that situation and have him tailgate my butt for the whole 10 kilometers of the road with no exit in sight, small roads, smaller exits. Finally my street came up and I turned for my hood entrance, whilst giving him the finger. The whole ordeal lasted half an hour with some stops along the way where I stopped abruptly so he could get out of his car profusely sweating and shouting obscene remarks about ending my existence as I repeatedly drove away while he struggled to get back in his mini car to begin chasing me again. Thanks for listening.